Hi there, everybody. I'm Lucas Martel. I'm the creator of Walkabout Mini Golf, and we're standing here on Seagull Stacks, the hard version in the snow. We'll kind of walk you through how this course came into being. So one of the interesting things that this course really sort of did, it was kind of where first realized how important the actual walkabout aspect and the importance of layout. So one of the things you notice is that if you, right here, you've got this big rock that's actually blocking your view. One of the things that we intentionally tried to do was create a sense of mystery so that as you're coming onto the course, you don't necessarily see. It's all sort of blocked by what's up above you. And we think a lot about that, especially on a lot of the new courses, is sort of like how people are going to see the course, how they're going to arrive at it, how they're going to progress through it. And in this case, having you ascend, especially after you first arrive, does a great job of kind of hiding things. So even though the course is very open, if you look at it from up above, you still can't actually see what the course is going to be until you get to that hole, at least for the first 9 holes. So yeah, the first 9 holes were really built with this very upward motion in mind. And this was also definitely the most sort of organic of the courses. We swapped the order of Cherry Blossom and Seagull Stacks. So yeah, this one was actually done right after Tourist Trap. But I really wanted to try to do a course that had a bit more of a natural feel to it. I've played a wide variety of real life mini golf courses, and some of them are more gimmicky, some of them are more about bank shots. This one was kind of mimicking a style that I've seen where it's almost more like real big golf a little bit. Except, of course, we keep the greens flat for the most part. And when we do introduce hills, this was the first one they actually introduced sort of like sloping, curving hills. It's still sort of the mini golf version of that. You're never sitting on a slant. It's just, oh, there is a section that might take you up. So the hole designs on this course were much more about the shape and kind of more open-ended. It actually makes it one of my favorite courses to play because there's a lot of different ways to play all the different holes, different strategies, and you can very easily get into spots that you've never been before that totally change how you're going to try to get yourself out of that spot. So I mentioned the layout earlier. This was the moment that we were sort of aiming for, where you're just sort of coming up this and suddenly you get a chance to finally see down and sort of see the entire course. So again, just sort of holding that back was a really big thing. And also that moment where you realize that you're actually up above some of the seagulls. It's a very cool reveal. Layout was really the name of the game in this course. This course, I think that a little bit of it was done in Gravity Sketch. Gravity Sketch being one of the tools that we've done to do a lot of the VR layout of most of our courses. This being the second course, I think I was just finding that tool and finding some ways to work with it. So I think that this was the first course that it really even came into play, but even then it was only sort of at the tail end. So a lot of this was still designed the more traditional way, just in, I guess it would have been Softimage. But yeah, on a traditional flat, like same thing as Maya or Blender or anything like that, not actually designing it in VR. As far as what we were going for with the design, I remember seeing I think it was maybe even a calendar or something, and it was like impossible golf holes. And it was this sort of like very Scottish Highlands of like, oh yeah, there's a green that's like 300 yards away it's like 200 feet in the air. There's no way you could possibly get to it. And I always liked that image, and it's like, I kind of actually want to play that golf course. Of course, it'd be impossible with real golf, but in this form, we were kind of able to create that, and that sense of just sort of like constant rising and falling and just these really, really epic cliff sides that you get. And originally, it was totally natural. There wasn't any of the bits of castle. That was added later just because it kind of needed a little something more. It needed a bit more theming. It was just a bit too down the straight and narrow. One of the challenges that I was having initially with the design was how to connect all of these different sort of rock spires, all these different sea stacks in a way that felt natural was really, really tough. And just adding the possibility that, okay, there's some broken bridges and some rubble lying around really sort of made it work in a way that was very, very nice. Here we get to, I believe, our first hole that really has the sort of elevation changes that I was talking about with our more swoopy hills that still feel like they're sort of poured cement is really kind of what we're always going for, that idea that this was still constructed out of the materials that you would use to build a real mini golf course. Another of the things that some people love and some people hate is how much you can actually change how a course plays by changing the borders. So in this case, just having these kind of broken apart rocks, the bricks that form the surface of the walls, it's amazing how much that changes something, because on a different course that was perfectly smooth, you would try more bank shots, you would try to roll along the edges a little bit more, and just changing it to being a little bit more unpredictable adds an element of risk versus reward, which is always something that we're after in our courses, trying to balance that. Are you going to take that risky shot off of that brick that sometimes bounces you in the perfect direction and sometimes sends you off out of bounds? So yeah, it really helps that we think about that shape language and the gameplay for each course individually. All the greens had this more organic, very curvy, kind of naturalistic shape, as opposed to the very rectilinear things like Cherry Blossom in particular. And that's also one of the reasons that we put it back. If you look at all of the original courses that shipped with the game, Tourist Trap was a bit more haphazard. Cherry Blossom is all rectangles and 45-degree angles, more very, very controlled and geometric. This is much more organic. And then Arizona Modern is all circles and perfect arcs. So each of those uses a very different shank language to give it a very unique feel and play in a totally different way. I love the hiking feel that this course gives you, and was also one of the reasons that we added all of these cairns all over the course, just to kind of, like you would in a real hike in the Scottish Highlands, you'd have all those cairns to help guide you if you're not quite sure where exactly you should be aiming for next. So this was the first course that we did weather effects on. And if you look at the snow, you notice that it's actually just squares, but it's amazing in VR how those little details, your mind still accepts them. And that was an artistic choice to keep them as solid squares, just because you realize that something starts to feel too realistic, it actually starts to detract, and you start to notice that it just doesn't fit in. So with everything that we do, even with our avatars, we've made a conscious effort to go for this sort of low poly look, which is still a very artistic thing that you have to do. If you get too far away from it, it just starts to fight against the rest of the game a little bit. This was also the first night mode that we did that wasn't lit up with torches or candles or lanterns or anything like that. This course needs to kind of feel like this place has been abandoned for a long time, and putting a bunch of lights around it just didn't feel right. So opted for night mode to go with more of this weather change that still let you see what you were doing. Kind of justified it by saying maybe the Arctic, you'd still maybe get snow in the summer when it's light. Maybe we're up above the Arctic Circle a little bit. So here we are coming up to hole 9, which is pretty much at the highest part of the course, shared with 10. You start to get this big look out at everything. The first 9 holes are all about ascending, whereas the back 9 holes, if you look across, are all about descending. So if you look down, you can actually see 18 way down there at the bottom, kind of tucked in, both for gameplay purposes, kind of gives you this separation between the front 9 and the back 9. It also kind of gives us something to play around with, that the holes can often feel different, where if you're putting up or flat on the front 9 and the back 9 tends to sort of feel more downward, it just gives a nice sort of like change in pace to how you're doing things. And again, you also get that with the sight lines, whereas in the front 9 we were kind of hiding, so you never saw what the holes were. Great thing is that you get to 9, you cross this bridge, which is the midpoint between the two, the front 9 and the back 9, and you've got this great view down that you see exactly where you're trying to get to. We actually just did an artist retreat when we were working on a couple of the new course designs in Oregon, right on the Oregon coast. And yeah, there's just something about going up to a cliffside and going down to a beach and seeing the waves breaking on a specific rock, like, oh, I want to get down to that point. A lot of what we do with layout is that sort of signaling to try to show people where they're going and giving them an objective so that they really feel like once you get there, it's like, oh, I've arrived, I've made it. So it's just a different form of sort of environmental storytelling. This is hole 10 right here. The easy version was one of the holes that we really kind of identified early on as a certain type of hole that we call the adventure hole, where we kind of present a couple of different paths. There's no like set way of getting through it, but something about this hole design, this really like, you've got very thin has through, you can really think a lot strategically, and it sort of allows you to take some big risks or to go a little bit more slowly, and it's just a really great design that lets people branch out and do things the way that they want to do. If you're being competitive, it can really have a big impact on your score. If you need that opportunity to get ahead, a hole like that is a great one to have right about the middle of each course we've found. This was also the first course really playing around with height and no railings. And it's always been kind of funny how I've been in VR for so long, it just doesn't even bother me anymore. But yeah, really wanted to hold on to that idea. Like, you can go right to the edge and look down. It definitely wigs a couple of people out when they are first experiencing VR until they kind of get their legs and get used to it. It's funny how I've even noticed how in real life now, I am less scared of heights than I was before I started doing VR, and especially before, doing some things like this. Not that I'm being risky or anything, but definitely even just going to the climbing gym with my daughter, I'm okay getting up a little bit higher and not freaking out. So it's definitely having a bit of an impact in a good way. And here we see what I was just talking about. The several holes right here are all down, down, down. This is another one of my sort of favorite hole designs. You force the player to go on a ramp, but then give them a narrow window that they have to hit in order to keep from going over the edge of something. There's just something very fun about VR mini golf, being able to send your ball tumbling 100 meters down into the waves and not have to worry about going to fetch it. So that's something that we've started doing more and more of, and higher. We try not to lean on it too much, but there's just something really spectacular about the height that you can get in VR. I'm also realizing that this is the very first course that included any sort of animals, the seagulls on this one, which became the name of the course. We have started doing that more and more. Not every course includes it, not every course it really fits, but it really just breathes a lot of life into a course. Just to have even a couple of birds flying around. When we added flying mode, or the ability to fly, just point your pointer or point your putter straight up and push the thumbstick forward and you'll take off. If you go into the settings menu, locomotion speed also affects how fast you fly. And as we were trying to dial in how fast we should let people go, we kept coming back to this course because I think we actually set it at 5 meters per second as the max speed. But that got you just a little bit of past the point where you could keep up with every single seagull, because it was just so much fun to just fly like in formation with the seagulls as they're winding around all the sea stacks. So that's actually why that upper limit is set where it's at. Beyond that, it just started to get a little crazy, but we at least wanted to hit that point that you could keep up with everything. This is hole 14, descending down to 15. If you want to take a hole that was easy and make it a lot harder, this one was literally just a matter of raising up the green so that instead of having those rocks that you can bounce off of, suddenly you have to really control the distance of your putt. So it's amazing how much you can change something from easy to hard just by removing the possibility of bouncing off of something, or putting the tee in a different spot, or the hole in a different spot, or just like slightly moving certain elements can completely change how a hole plays. And we're trying to actually do a better job of keeping that more consistent between easy and hard, partially just so that it forces us to think about things that we wouldn't have necessarily thought of, as opposed to completely reinventing a hole from scratch. In most cases, every hole that you can kind of come up with, there's an easy and a hard version of it. So this was another spot where I think where we actually realized that we kind of needed the cairns, because there's a couple of spots where the stairs are even a bit hard to see, even when you're right on top of them, because they're just so steep. So adding the cairns really helps sort of guide people through. This course is probably my favorite fox hunt that Henning did. If you haven't played it yet, it's a really good one to start with, and all the layout stuff that I have been talking about. Henning really used that to sort of, it's not word clues, it's picture clues. And it's all about sort of like getting into a position where certain things line up with each other. And it's really, really cool use of the space, and takes everything that we were doing with the layout and just sort of like really sort of like draws attention to it in the perfect way. So we are coming up here to hole 18. I keep talking about layout, but that's so much of what this entire course is about. It might seem a little bit weird to have hole 18 be the lowest on the course, but you really get this sense when you're down here for the first time that you're completely surrounded by all these sea stacks. You've got the birds sort of like flying up above you. And one of the things that we keep talking about when we're doing designs for courses is that bridges, everyone loves bridges, but the thing that makes bridges so cool is often not when you're standing on them. It's usually when you're down below looking up at them. Like even when you're on the Golden Gate Bridge, like it's cool, but that view from below the Golden Gate Bridge is almost more iconic, and it just gives you so much more to sort of look at. So we've tried to make a point of that if whenever we're adding bridges, like you don't want to just have walking over, you want to make sure that there's an opportunity to get down below them or to at least see them from a distance as you're approaching them, because it just really frames the environment very, very nicely and creates a great flow to the layout of everything. So that's Seagull Stacks Hard.